So we're, I have some questions, but we're hoping to make this quite conversational.
Yeah.
Do you think with that? Is it okay with that? What do you think?
Yeah.
If you can't hear us, please shout. Otherwise, I'll just be going to different levels. So, yeah, we're going to have a bit of a chat about menswear. Do have any questions, say at the end, but also do interrupt as well, or raise your hand or anything if you want to kind of chip in. That'd be great. So, Lorenzo, I wanted to start with talking about how bespoke has changed in the last kind of 10 years. 10 years is very important for me because Permanent Style was started 10 years ago. But also, I think from your point of view in your business, you have seen a huge change in that kind of 10 years as well.
Sure.
What do you think have been the biggest changes in that time?
You see, the young people here tonight. Sorry for my English. So I'm not French, Italian, but my English is so bad, but it's okay. So yes, 20 years ago it was more like a classic 50 years old people, 60 years old, very classic, and you are a rich man and you wear a bespoke suit. Today it's completely different. You have young people like tonight, 30 years old, 40 years old, who love tailoring, who love bespoke, who love all the details, you know, a lot about the story about all the tailor all over the world, Napolitan, English, French, so the Japanese tailor from Hong Kong too. So it's very different. The people come, they like to go to the workshop to see how my workers work, how I do with the jacket. They ask a lot of questions about tailoring, about canvas, about buttonholes, everything. They know more about all my details than me. Or like, sometimes I have some jacket with some name, and they know about the name of the jacket. I don't remember the name of my jacket, so it's very interesting. It's very nice for all the tailor all around the world.
Yeah, and maybe quite interesting because obviously we are those customers now, but those customers you talk about 20 years ago, what would they like to deal with? Like, were they still interested in the product as well, or not so much?
It was more, you are rich or you are in bespoke, you know, it was more a world was like this, you know, you don't use really to wear. You know, it was more like after you have always elegant people. I think in the 40s, in the 50s with my grandfather was more like people really educated, really passionate about tailoring. And the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s down, and after
it's been recovering since.
Yes, sunset. Well, yes.
And those customers 20 years ago, they weren't making an active choice to buy bespoke. That was just kind of what they did because what their fathers had done and what everybody did.
Yeah.
But were they interested in other things like the style or the cloth and so on? Did they always want particular types of buttons or particular pocket styles or anything?
No, nothing. They came for only a blazer, blue blazer, a flannel, a GB single, morning coat for wedding or for to go to riding horse. I don't know, that kind of thing. But very classic, and you know, and social media like you help a lot because also, you know, before in Cifonelli we have only 2 articles a year about tailoring, one in French newspaper, one in the US newspaper. Not a lot of people know about tailoring, about Cifonelli or the tailors, you know. So now with you, with some magazines, and we are more well known. It's better for us, and so it's what also with now we're traveling all around the world. All the Napolitan tailors go to Hong Kong, New York, like me, London, Manila. So it's a really new world for us.
And it's interesting because one of the things that I think a lot of people will know you for, just one of the things, is coming up with some quite original designs. You know, you like coming with new things and making siren suits or whatever it might be. But did you not do that till recently then?
I started, I'm 48, so I'm in the business for 25 years. And so I want to wear it, and so sometimes I think the tailor is a bit old-fashioned, you know, like for my grandfather, so I try to give some for Cifonelli. I try something more modern, style more modern. So.
And when did you start doing that?
I always tried, you know.
Really?
You know, when I was 30 years, I tried. You know, I have, you know, sometimes I think sometimes people have think about tailoring about it's for old people, so it's not fashion.
Yeah.
So I try to broach this.
So what was one of the first things you made? You're designing back then. It was a bit different.
I think the Cifonelli cut is a very risky and close to the body. The hammer is very high, so we are in the mood. We are not like.
You're not changing everything.
No, we are not like some tailor who like boxes. Some more So it's easy with my cuts.
So the style is already actually quite modern. You don't have to change a lot of things.
So I have to access my highs, the lines of the jackets, the lapels, and in Cifonelli, sometimes I have to forget the measurement, and I try to think about the body and how I can do it a better jacket for the guys. So this is like I have to be happy with my jacket. If I am not happy, okay, I don't give the jacket to the guys. I don't care if we need one more fitting. I would do one more fitting.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the first rule. You never give a jacket if you are not happy. Not 100, but you never 100 happy. More or less, you have to be happy.
I think it's interesting. I think that's one of the things that always I always found having things made with you is it's slightly disconcerting when you go to have a fitting and you always look annoyed. Even if the jacket looks perfect to me, you're always just kind of circling around. It's not. Just looking really frustrated with that. No, it's perfect, and you always look kind of frustrated and annoyed, whatever it is, because clearly you've seen something that even I haven't seen, and just kind of frustrating you, or that you want to kind of change slightly.
This is my job, so I have my height like this, and I cannot happy. I don't feel bad, and I don't want to do it. If you customer happy, maybe you can have 2 more customers. If the customer is unhappy, he speaks all over the world, everybody, Cifonelli is not a good tailor, so you have to take care about this.
I've always found it strange that people don't have that approach. There's so few things that you actually walk around as a walking advertisement for, and yet some tailors don't seem to really care that much about that kind of thing, which is weird.
I take care a lot of this, because yes, if you are not happy with energy, so you have to care about what you are doing. You have to do a good job for it. So I try to do a good job for everybody. Sometimes it takes time for the first time. After it's better, but no problem. So, and can you explain about English tailor, Italian tailor, French tailor? What the difference is? Well,
you've got 3 minutes, Simon.
And why you start in this?
Why did I start in this?
In this world?
I started, so my career has been as a financial journalist,
yes.
And that's why I started out. I trained as a journalist, as an editor, and I think, 3-4 years into my job, I got some money and bought my first suit and was excited about it. It was a £120 pale grey suit from Zara with white pinstripes, and it was the most horrific thing I've ever worn. And I didn't know why it was horrific. I couldn't work out what was so bad about it, but I hated it. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And I think that kind of that fired something in my head about trying to work out what it was. Kind of led me down a rabbit hole of working out, looking at different styles and looking at cloths and things. And then a couple of years later, I started I met a tailor called Graham Brown in the UK, who was very cheap and very accessible for me, and I think then you're meeting a craftsman, that takes you another route down the same rabbit hole, when you can ask them any question you like about absolutely anything, and how they do things and question things. And it's kind of been like that ever since, really. And although there's lots of different things I do cover, I try and keep it quite narrow and focused. I don't really cover watches. I like the fact I know nothing about watches, so when I like people to tell me about watches, or whiskey or cigars or cars or anything else, always trying to keep that same approach, but to a few just kind of small disciplines, I guess. Do you want me to attempt to explain the difference between suit styles? I think most people here are probably, the audience is educated enough, they probably know the basics about those kind of, these differences in styles, but if anyone has any particular questions now or later, please kind of let me know.
Yes, but what do you think about now from the tailor so you say more Italian style? Is Italian or different style, or one style, Napolitan style, Roman style?
I suppose I don't know. At the very least, maybe the most obvious big ones that are different are kind of the English style and kind of the south of Italy. Then maybe another level down, there's kind of at least 2 or 3 English styles, a sort of drape cut like an Anderson Shepherd would do, a more structured cut like a Henry Poole or Dejan Skinner, and a sort of very structured, more dramatic cut like a Edward Sexton or Chesborough Morgan. Then there's Paris, obviously, which is very different, and then in Italy, generally, certainly Milan is very different to Naples, and Florence is a bit of a distinct style of its own as well. Much more different regional styles in Italy than anywhere else. Not really any in England at all. I think that's probably the level. It's not really worth going down much more of a level than that.
On that note, how important do you think in reality these differences are? Because there's a lot of people talk about it a lot. What is English style? What is Italian style? Is this Milanese? Is it Florentine? Do you think it matters? Do you think it's important?
I would say it's a bit of a generalisation, but I'd say maybe at that very top level of kind of an English versus kind of very soft Southern Italian, that definitely makes a difference. Because I was just having a chat with the customers here about the fact that so few people wear suits these days, and what you want something that's dressed up but still quite casual, particularly in Hong Kong where it's so hot and humid, and being able to wear a sports jacket really well with an open neck shirt and still look very elegant and very casual, maybe wear the same sports jacket with jeans. For me personally, I think it's much more suited to a softer Southern Italian jacket.
Yeah.
So for a young guy today, I think that's maybe the kind of thing you should look at for that kind of dressing, and English is going to feel mostly very different to that. The level below that, with all those kind of regional differences, it still makes a fairly big difference. So I quite like Florentine and Milanese styles, for example, and French, but they're all still, for me, often a little bit more formal, often because of the shoulder line and the sleeve head than the Southern Italian. And at that level, I guess it's slightly more about the formality is not going to change that much. I mean, it's slightly more about just personal styles you like, you know. I think the Milanese cut it's sort of a soft shoulder, but still quite square, so it tends to make you look kind of square and kind of powerful. The Florentine has a sort of extended shoulder, so it has that for strength, but it's sort of quite curved and flowy elsewhere. But I think that's the level, where it's more about personal preference, perhaps.
So you're saying, broadly, English maybe lends itself more to formality, Southern Italian more to casual wear, but then in between that, it's what you like and what suits you maybe as an individual.
Probably, and you can, and this is just a generalisation for most people. You can wear English tailoring quite casually and pull it off and look good. You can wear Neapolitan tailoring quite formally and look really good as well. But as a rule to start from, I'd say that's probably good. Okay.
So for you, it's impossible to say this tailor is better than the other one because every tailor is different, every style is different. So
yeah.
if we ask to you who is the best tailor, it's impossible. Yeah. Tonight. No, it is not easy to answer because you know different style. So
I think there's two things that make that really difficult. I think one is the fact that when you say what is the best, that doesn't mean anything. It's best on what's your actual factor, what's the parameter you're using, right? So, for example, you guys, Parisian and Parisian tailors generally, but particularly you, tend to do pretty much better finishing than anybody else. The Neapolitans just don't care that much about finishing. They've got small buttonholes, generally thick buttonholes, they don't care so much. That doesn't mean it's better, but on that one parameter, one is clearly better than the other. If your parameter is talking about kind of comfort, then, for example, an English drape cuff is a lot more comfortable than an English structured cuff. And the other one that makes it difficult is just a lot of it is still very aesthetic things about taste and about your style, and things you like to wear, and I completely understand when some people just don't like the Neapolitan style because it looks so kind of sloppy, and some people just can't imagine someone could wear an Edward Sexton coat because it just looks like either like a Star Wars baddie or something like that. It's too much. So yeah. Is it my time to ask you a question, or have you got another question?
I have some questions.
Okay, so carry on.
What do you think about now about Hong Kong tailors and Japanese tailors? What do you think about that?
Very good question.
Japanese tailors was quite interesting. So I went to Japan last year, really for the first time, to see tailors. There's a lot of really good, interesting tailors in Japan. One of the things that struck me most is they're all surprisingly, incredibly humble, and I think it's generally a thing in Japan, but also particularly with the tailors, I don't think I got any of them to say that they would say you should buy one of their suits rather than an Italian suit. Like the vast majority of them have been trained by one of the Italian tailors, and they would always say, if you can, go and get it from Italy, don't get it from me. And they're like, really? Which, and in some cases, maybe that's true, in other cases, it definitely isn't. But I think there's a humbleness there, humility, which I think is slightly difficult. Maybe they need to kind of slightly get over, or a bit more of the Italian selling technique needs to come in there somewhere. Well, it's interesting. Often you get what is interesting. Often is the Japanese who have decided to live in Italy and stay there, whether that's shoemakers or tailors or anybody else, because a lot of them will often say that they couldn't live in Japan because they're not Japanese enough, but they're also more Japanese than the Italians, so they're kind of somewhere in between. And a lot of the kind of tailors and shoemakers stay there, I think, have that kind of angle, which is nice.
have some questions, maybe?
What do you look for in a tailor? What are the characters?
I think the first thing always is probably a style that I really like and really attracts me. I think it's quite easy in bespoke to get really into the craft because that's the area which it has over any other type of clothing. But fundamentally, it has to have a style that really appeals to you. The craft is always going to be secondary for me. I think the craft is a necessary but not sufficient condition.
The style is very important. Number one is the style, and after for me, craft is quality. So yeah, it's quality also. So in chiffonier we try to have the both, and a lot of Italian tailor has the style. Quality is not so good. But for me, we try to have the both. But it's better to have the style than the craft.
Yeah, which for a lot of craftsmen to say, I think is very impressive. You know, that's
in
kind
France, a lot of tailor have the quality, but the style is not my taste.
For you,
It's not my taste. So it's why you have to get the good balance between quality and in chiffonier. So I try to do. I think we have a good balance between everything. I try to have style, quality, and so it's why it is very important for me.
Someone asking a question about that.
For the sake of argument, let's say you really like Italian style or a Florentine style. You can't bear the workmanship, you can't bear the quality. Would you look around for the best one in Naples or Florence or whatever?
Yeah, I guess.
Or would you go to Cifonelli and ask them to make it more relaxed?
No. I think that's it can work, and I have seen people do it work, but I think that's the exception. I think the vast majority of the time, you shouldn't ask a tailor to change his style or try and do something different, because there's one of the things you appreciate the more you learn about bespoke tailoring is how many different variables there are and how many things to change. And if you get a tailor to try and look at one style and mimic it, they'll change half those things, but either ignore or not see the other half of the things. So, just very briefly, in England, you see a lot of people trying to do softer styles, but generally what they do is use a softer canvas and a softer shoulder pad, but keep the lines exactly the same. And it just looks like an English jacket with softer shoulders, because the line of an English jacket is so much sharper and squarer, and they just ignore that and leave that exactly the same. And it's not the same thing.
But also, the cutter is very important. So sometimes in the same house, you have different cutter, and the cut is not the same. It's the same house. You know, so you have to take care. So you go to, I don't know, I say Anderson Shepard, they have 3 or 4 tailors, maybe cutter, and the suit at the end is not the same. It's Malto, I don't know. So this also you have to take care. Who is your tailor?
Try and use the same person.
And tailoring is also it's a meeting between the tailor and the customer, and they have to understand each other. And this is very important. The relationship between and the confidence between the customer and the tailor. This is rule number 1. If the customer doesn't have confidence with the tailor, it's impossible to make a suit. Impossible. So this and this is built slowly, the confidence, and with the tailor, and you have to take care, because after you can make a mistake, 2 mistakes, after you lose everything. So you have to, for the tailor, you build very slowly the confidence with the customer, and after you are always, and each jacket you can make
improve. We can improve. Do you find that harder these days because there are more people are more likely to try lots of different tailors? So there must be more people now that come to you for just one thing, and then you don't see them again. Is that frustrating?
No, for me it's okay. No, it's not. It was always like this. The question is, it's more.
But you can't develop a relationship.
No,
with them
no. Even chiffonier, I'm very happy. People they come back always to chiffonier. Maybe they go to the tailor.
But you know they're coming back, don't you?
Yeah, they come on. No, okay. I don't have a customer who make only one jacket. If I make only one jacket, my jacket is not good. So it's life. I better always come back, make a second one. Maybe go to Anderson Shepard, to Village, I don't know. But after you come back, yes, it's okay. You can hit it even better. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
My experience of bespoke tailoring goes back many years when I first had a coat made. I wanted to have a very nice coat made, a Crombie traditional style, at a tailor in London. Chose a very nice material and was measured and fitted. It was a disaster, sadly. And that put me off.
Why was it a disaster from you?
Well, I'll tell you why. I've got a very weird body shape.
I was going to say.
And,
And
and so, you know, the fitted stuff sort of really didn't gel with me.
okay.
So ever since that experience, I tended to buy clothes, you know, that were just hanging there, and
Yeah.
I've gone for kind of loose-looking suits because anything else I've tended to look like Humpty Dumpty, you know, I was kind of not looking very good. So I need some advice. What should I do?
Well, it's hard to know exactly why that first one didn't work out, but I think I'd certainly be confident that bespoke tailoring could make you look better than any ready-to-wear tailoring. I think it kind of, to Lorenzo's point, it's always worth setting those expectations at the start. If you have those issues, if you have any problems.
For me, it's better a good ready-to-wear than a tailor, for sure. And you have very nice ready-to-wear made to measure. It's better than 60% of the tailor in the world. Yeah, I think so. You know, bad. Maybe it's by hand, but at the end, the jacket with the shoe, the coat is the top coat is not good. So sometimes a good ready-to-wear like Catolini, I don't know, it's kind of a Rayoni, it's better than a tailor who is not so good. And so you're right. Sometimes you have to take care of where you make your suit or jacket.
And I think that's one that makes it hard. People, it's easy to make the assumption that bespoke would naturally be better, obviously be better. But I think it's, again, I think Lorenzo's more open and honest about this than a lot of people and say, you know, there's no reason why bespoke should naturally be better. It's got more tools to play with, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're much better at using them.
Simon?
Yes, you.
I have a question related to that gentleman's question. Would you say that depending on the body type of the person, there is some style of tailoring which is naturally going to fit better than the other? As in, you know, if someone is very, you know, tall and athletic or skinny, then he should go to Milan or to London or to Naples.
Probably yes, there are things that will suit you more, but I think it's often more helpful to think of not just this body type suits this style, but more kind of you as a person with this body type, what do you want to emphasise or not emphasise? Because with more structured tailoring and bigger shoulder pads, you're going to look like you've got square, bigger shoulders, right? Now, you may have a guy who does a lot of in the gym, is actually very, or just naturally very broad, and he actually quite likes that, wants to emphasise that, and that's fine. It may be that actually that you could have a very large, round guy who's someone that say, you don't want to wear Neapolitan tailoring, it's going to make you just look like a ball. But he goes, I don't care, that's the look, I like that look. It's just understanding what is going to happen and then make an informed choice, if that makes sense, rather than do the simple thing of this suits that and this suits that. Is that, it's not a very helpful answer, I know, because it's saying it's not easy, but...
No, but it's down to personal preference, basically.
Yeah, just be aware of those things. I mean, it's very, what flatters people, and it's quite, what can flatter different things is fairly straightforward. You know, so then just work out what those things you want or don't want, I guess.
So Simon,
yes.
Go back to the question I just asked you.
Oh yeah.
Like after trying so many different tailors around the world, like what still excites you?
It's probably slightly contradictory given the name of my website, but it's always new things, always excites you. Like I think the more you do this, the more you realise, you know, why fashion does so well, why fashion exists. Nothing excites me more than discovering something new, which I really like, really appeals to me, and then going through the process of kind of discovering it, learning about it, in my case probably writing about it, then buying it, writing about it again, wearing it over time. Like that's such a pleasurable experience to go through. So I don't know, something like, for example, only like beginning of last year I became aware of Stoffer, for example, that does kind of casual made-to-measure suede jackets and things, and I've so loved, I guess, his approach and his aesthetic and the kind of the products he made, how he put things together. Really excited about it. Like 2 months later, met him and interviewed him. 2 months later, that decided to buy something, and that is so exciting, gets me excited every single time. I think it's definitely when you're covering lots of tailors, who, as you said, definitely have some differences, but the differences get smaller and smaller the more granular you go. It is hard to be as excited about them every time. But I would still say that in general, tailoring is still more exciting to me than any other type of clothing, which is quite fortunate, really. You know, otherwise it'd be quite a pain to write about it all the time.
Tu es quoi, easy person?
Tailors? Oh god. No.
They're all the best tailor in the world.
It's weird that, isn't it? Except for the Japanese. I think that none of them are the best tailors in the world. Yeah, tailors are odd beasts. So, yeah. I think particularly that there must be, it's not the case with all people, it's certainly not the case with you, but there's clearly some people who would personally find it quite suited to working on their own in small spaces for long periods of time, doing very detailed things. You know, and they're not always necessarily the most outgoing or vivacious or entertaining people. Which are still wonderful and kind and generous people for all that, but yeah, that makes it slightly harder sometimes.
So shoemakers, what do you think about the shoemakers?
Shoemakers are great, love shoemakers.
You see differences between bespoke shoes and ready-to-wear shoes?
Yeah, and
It's not easy to. I think a bespoke, a good bespoke suit, you see the difference between it's ready-to-wear or ready difference.
Yeah.
For myself, between a beautiful ready-to-wear shoes and bespoke shoes,
yeah,
not easy sometimes.
No.
Like a shirt,
yes.
shirt and bespoke shirt, and,
yeah,
and made-to-measure shirt. Sometimes it's not easy. Huh?
I think it's definitely different. I think it's with shoes. It's often much harder to justify the price difference. I think because you're talking multiples that are comparable to ready-to-wear tailoring often. But yeah, the differences are often small. If you can find a ready-to-wear shoe where you like the shape of the last and that the last and a certain size width combination really work for you, then it's hard to find the justification for bespoke. You know, then with bespoke you're talking about small aesthetic things around the pitch of the heel or on the waist, but even that you can get from some ready-to-wear makers as well. You're talking about greater strength in the welt and other parts of the making, which are great, but the chances are they'll never have a real effect on you unless you have one pair of shoes you wear for years and years and years. So it's much harder to justify from that point of view, I think. And I love my bespoke shoes that I've got, but you know, I also have a fair number of ready-to-wear shoes and I have no ready-to-wear tailoring, and that probably says something about where the value difference lies.